Yeah, I want to drop a couple of gems with regards to manifestation. Manifestation, the law of attraction, the power of thoughts, the power of words, and stuff like that. The first thing I want to say is that a lot of that information has been given to us by the Holy Scriptures, by the ancient religious writings of all times. But in particular, these beliefs have been propagated throughout the biblical narrative. For instance, the book of Genesis, many people misunderstand Genesis. They think that the opening or the introduction of Genesis is some type of physical description of how the universe came to be. But it isn't. It only is that in part. That's why people get to the point where they want to argue against creation versus the Big Bang and evolution as if these are contradictory assertions. They are not. The Bible is primarily concerned with explaining to the individual how to orient his consciousness to work within the dynamics of the universal. You see, it's not an elucidation of how the physical world came to be per se, but it is a description of how the physical world came to be with regards to its relationship to the human, spiritual, psychic, and emotional constitution. Spiritual, psychic, emotional, and physical constitution. You see, all these things are described within the beginning of Genesis. So let's go to the beginning of Genesis, which of course begins with in the beginning. Now, what does the Bible mean by in the beginning? Does it mean before time? Well, of course, it means before time. You see, the Bible is an allegorical amalgamation, an allegorical shorthand rendering of ancient Hebrew cosmogony. Now, the ancient Hebrews believed that in the beginning there subsisted a dark potentiality of no thingness, not nothingness in the sense that it was devoid of any and all substances, but no thingness in that it was filled to the brim with potentiality, yet this potentiality lacked form. So everything was dark. Now, the only thing that existed in this timeless expanse. Now, let me tell you why there was no time. Because scientifically, time can only be measured by the relative movement of objects with regards to one another. So something has to take form. There has to be one form or one object within space, and it has to move through space to the position of another object or another position. And to measure time, what you do is you figure out the rate of that movement, like 15 miles per hour. So you have to establish rate and distance and have movement in order to establish time. So the reason there was no time in the beginning is because the universe subsisted in a state of complete nothingness. Now, remember, in the beginning is before time. So what the ancient Kabbalists did was they conceptualized space as a boundless, limitless sphere, if you can imagine that. They just imagined a sphere or a circle whose circumference was nowhere. See what I'm saying? A sphere whose circumference was nowhere because it's limitless, and whose center was everywhere because it's omnipresent. So what you just have to do is imagine a circle or sphere in your mind, and you have to just amend the fact that the boundary is limitless and the center is everywhere. The reason that we use the sphere for that is because our mind cannot conceptualize a boundless entity that is also centered everywhere. So you just use the sphere so that we can understand what we're thinking about. Now, in your mind, you have this sphere of pure spirit. It's like a vacuum, but it's pure spirit, pure potentiality. Not a vacuum is how we know it, but just one that's overflowing with potential energy and light. You see? Now, in all ancient cosmogonies, what the ancient philosophers did was they conceptualized this sphere as thinking substance, because they knew that they were the pinnacle of creation. They knew that however creation was made, that they themselves were imparted with it. So they stripped everything down, and they knew that the mind was the beginning of any and all things. So they had this infinite sphere of conception that was permeated by a universal consciousness much like their own. So what the ancients did was, through reasoning and through concentration and prayer, what they came to understand was that the creation of the universe was imparted in the very same way that we begin our thought processes. So just imagine if you were an infinite mind out in creation, no thingness. The way that the mind works is the very first stage of thought would be that of self-contemplation. So we have the ain, as it was called, the infinite substance, beginning a process of self-contemplation. Now what that would be like this agitation on this infinite ocean of thought. This agitation is now taking place. We've got these ripples, and that's that self-contemplation. That's how we feel when we contemplate. We just got this free-flowing thought, right? So that's what the universe was doing, contemplating itself. And then the universe reflected upon what it was contemplating. So the universe reflected upon eternity. The universe reflected upon infinity, in that a point of attention was given. When you reflect, you think about what it is you've been thinking about. You see, so it takes it to the next level. And that's what the universe did. So you have this, so imagine this center, and you have this free flowing ripples out, they're outgoing to the limitless expanse, but you've imagined a limit to it so that we can conceptualize what's going on. So now the ripples begin to come back, and now the ripples augment one another when they meet. You see what I'm saying? That's called wave coherence. The waves, as they move together, they get stronger. So that's the point of universal self-reflection, which is a step higher than universal self-contemplation. Now, finally, when we're thinking of something, first we contemplate, and then we reflect, and finally we concentrate. Concentration is fixing a singular point of attention upon a thing. Now, the point of universal concentration is what is known as God in all ancient cosmogonies, particularly the Bible. So what we have is, in the beginning, all those processes of the ain and the creation and the self-contemplation took place in the beginning. And then the Bible says God. When the Bible says God, what it means is the point of infinite concentration of the universal creative mind. Everything, every thought, every amount of light and power and love was concentrated into a singular point. This point is known as the monad in ancient philosophy. Pythagoras was really big on the monad. It's the beginning of monotheism. Now notice, a monotheistic deity that is the result of a universal creative consciousness placing all of its attention in one place. The word aten is the root of attention. The Aten was the monotheistic universal deity of the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten. I like to say Akhenaten because it sounds cool, but I guess it's supposed to be pronounced Akhenaten. But this is my video. This is my recording. And I'm going to say Akhenaten. So Akhenaten's universal deity, Akhenaten's formless universal deity that was devoid of form but was filled with intelligence and energy, was named the Aten, the point of universal concentration, where the universe placed its attention. In the Hebrew cosmogony was the crown, or in Greek philosophy was the monad. Either way, we're dealing with a singular point of creation. So we have in the beginning God. Always remember that in the beginning is referring to a much larger process. The Bible is shorthand for the explanation of the dictates of ancient cosmogonies. Now, if you study the ancient cosmogonies from other cultures, for instance, the Brahmins or the Egyptians or the Greeks, you'll see that there are great parallels amongst them. They're basically all saying the same thing. When we get to this beginning part, the Greeks said out of chaos comes cosmos. Now cosmos is a circular movement that is centrifugal and centripetal motion in a simultaneous fashion, and that is absolute motion. So that would be the beginning. That's why all things take the form of spheres, not spears, but spheres, circles. Now it's important to remember this monad because it's going to appear again, because the monad was the central tenet of cosmologist George Lemaitre's Big Bang theory. So we're going to show you how the Big Bang and Genesis actually line up perfectly. But first, we're going to continue to explain how the Bible is teaching us about a universal creative consciousness forming the universe. Okay, so in the beginning, God. This initial description describes omniscience, because what we have seen is a formless consciousness working out the beginnings from a state that is beyond time and space. So in the beginning means before time, but it also means at first in principle or first cause. But remember, the principle and the cause is the outpouring of the dynamics of a universal creative consciousness. So in the beginning, God means we have established a point of omniscience at the beginning.